The enslavement begins. The cold, metallic walls of the alien slaver vessel echoed with the anguished cries of captured humans. The Jekker Empire had long prided itself on subjugating other species, and this time was no different, except that the captives were humans. Commander Threkos, a high-ranking officer in the Jekker fleet, observed the new slaves with a sense of superiority, his reptilian eyes gleaming with malicious intent. The humans had proven to be more resilient than expected, but in his mind, they were still no match for the might of the Jekker. Threkos tightened the neural collars around the necks of the captured humans, a cruel grin spreading across his scaly face as their screams grew louder. He marveled at how quickly their defiance seemed to fade, replaced by a fear that fed his ego. Yet, deep within him, a small part of Threkos wondered if this was just the calm before the storm. These humans had shown a tenacity he hadn't encountered before, a refusal to break even under the most intense pressure. As Threkos watched the humans being herded into their holding cells, his mind drifted back to the initial encounters. The Jekker fleet had swept into the Sol system with overwhelming force, expecting to crush the human resistance within days. But the humans had fought back with an unexpected ferocity, turning their factories into war machines and their colonies into fortresses. What had started as a simple raid had turned into a prolonged conflict that had stretched the Jekker Empire's resources thin. Now, with the last remnants of the human fleet scattered and their colonies in ruins, the Jekker believed they had finally won. But Threkos was not so sure. He had seen the look in the eyes of the human leaders they had captured. The burning resolve, the unwavering determination. The humans were not broken. They were merely biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike back. The command deck of Threkos' flagship was filled with the hum of machinery and the soft chatter of his officers. The Jekker had won countless battles, and they had no reason to believe this one would be any different. Yet Threkos couldn't shake the feeling that they were underestimating their enemy. The humans had proven themselves to be resourceful and cunning, capable of turning even the direst situations to their advantage. "My lord," a censor officer reported, "the human captives are being secured. All resistance has been neutralized." Threkos nodded, his mind still racing with thoughts of what the humans might be planning. He knew that he should be celebrating their victory, but something told him that the fight was far from over. The humans had lost this battle, but the war, Threkos was beginning to suspect, had only just begun. He turned his gaze to the viewport, where the distant stars shimmered like diamonds against the blackness of space. Somewhere out there, he knew, the remaining humans were regrouping, preparing for their next move. And when they came, Threkos vowed to be ready. The Jekker Empire had conquered countless worlds, and it would not fall to a race of primitive apes. But as he watched the stars, a flicker of doubt crept into his mind, one that he could not easily dismiss. Humanity strikes back. Deep within the bowels of the Jekker flagship, the captured humans huddled together, their spirits bruised but not broken. Among them was Captain Sarah Carter, a seasoned military leader who had fought in countless battles against the alien invaders. Her once proud uniform was torn and bloodied, but her resolve remained unshaken. She knew that they were in a dire situation, but she also knew that they had a chance, no matter how slim, to turn the tables on their captors. Sarah had been part of the last-ditch effort to defend Earth from the Jekker onslaught, commanding a ragtag fleet of retrofitted civilian ships and outdated military vessels. The odds had been stacked against them from the start, but Sarah and her crew had fought with everything they had, refusing to give up even as their comrades fell around them. Now, she found herself a prisoner, but she was not ready to surrender. "We need to find a way out of here," she whispered to the other captives, her voice steady despite the pain she felt. "We can't let them break us." The others nodded in agreement, their eyes reflecting the same determination that burned within Sarah. They had lost their ships, their homes, and many of their friends, but they still had each other. And as long as they were alive, they still had hope. Sarah began to formulate a plan. The Jekker were arrogant. She knew that much. They believed that their technology and numbers made them invincible, but Sarah had seen firsthand that they were far from unbeatable. The key was to exploit their weaknesses, to use their overconfidence against them. "We'll need to take control of the ship," Sarah continued, her mind racing as she considered their options. "If we can get to the command deck, we can override the security systems and send a distress signal to the remaining human forces." It was a long shot, and Sarah knew it. The Jekker ship was heavily guarded, and they were outnumbered and outgunned. But it was the only chance they had, and Sarah was determined to take it. "We'll have to move fast," she said, her voice filled with a sense of urgency. "If we wait too long, they'll transport us to one of their slave worlds, and then it will be too late." The others agreed, their resolve hardening as they realized the gravity of their situation. They had come too far to give up now. Together, they began to prepare for what would be the most dangerous mission of their lives. A mission that, if successful, could turn the tide of the entire war. Sarah looked around at her fellow captives, feeling a sense of pride swell within her. They were not just survivors. They were fighters, each one ready to lay down their lives for the greater good. And with that thought, Sarah knew that they had a chance, a real chance, to win. The battle for the ship. The plan was simple in theory, but perilous in execution. Sarah and the other captives waited for the shift change, when the Jekker guards would be at their most vulnerable. Timing was crucial, and Sarah watched the clock with an intensity that made each second feel like an eternity. The moment the guards stepped away, she gave the signal, and they sprang into action. Sarah led the charge, her heart pounding in her chest as they stormed out of their cell and into the corridor. The element of surprise was on their side, and they quickly overpowered the first group of Jekker soldiers they encountered. Armed with the guards' weapons, the humans moved swiftly through the ship, taking out any resistance they encountered. Their target was the command deck, where they could take control of the ship and possibly even turn its weapons against the rest of the Jekker fleet. But the path to the command deck was fraught with danger. The Jekker had installed numerous security measures to protect their most vital areas, and the humans had to navigate through a series of deadly traps and locked doors. Sarah's military training proved invaluable as she led the group through the ship's maze-like interior. She anticipated the Jekker's defenses, using her knowledge of military tactics to outmaneuver their guards and disable their security systems. But the further they advanced, the more intense the resistance became. The Jekker were beginning to realize what was happening, and they were not about to let their captives take over the ship without a fight. As they neared the command deck, the corridors grew narrower, and the fighting more intense. The humans were forced to take cover behind bulkheads as the Jekker opened fire with their advanced plasma rifles. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and the cries of the wounded, but Sarah and her team pressed on, driven by the knowledge that their only chance of survival lay in reaching the command deck. Finally, they'd reached the massive blast doors that guarded the entrance to the command deck. Sarah knew that this was the final obstacle, and it would not be easy to overcome. The doors were reinforced with layers of alien alloy, and the control panel had been heavily encrypted. But Sarah had come too far to give up now. "Cover me," she shouted to the others as she began working on the control panel, her fingers flying over the alien interface as she tried to override the security lock. The others fired at the advancing Jekker soldiers, holding them off while Sarah worked. The tension was palpable as the seconds ticked by, each one bringing them closer to either victory or defeat. Just when it seemed like the doors would never open, there was a loud click, followed by the sound of the blast doors slowly sliding apart. Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her heart pounding in her ears as she stared at the open doorway. Beyond it lay the command deck, and their only chance at survival. Turning the tide. The command deck was a hive of activity as the Jekker officers scrambled to respond to the unexpected incursion. Threkos, who had been overseeing the operation from his command chair, rose to his full height as the doors slid open, revealing the ragtag group of human captives. His eyes narrowed in anger and disbelief. How had they managed to get this far? Sarah stepped forward, her weapon trained on Thrakos as she entered the room, flanked by the other humans. The air was thick with tension as the two sides faced off, the fate of the ship, and possibly the entire war, hanging in the balance. "You've lost, Thrakos," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Surrender now, and we'll spare your crew." Thrakos' lip curled in a sneer. "You think you've won, human. You are nothing but a nuisance, a minor inconvenience to be crushed beneath the heel of the Jekker Empire." But even as he spoke, Thrakos could see the determination in Sarah's eyes, the fire that had driven her and her people to fight back against impossible odds. It was a fire he had seen before, in the eyes of other species they had conquered. But this time, it was different. This time, he could feel the weight of their defiance, the unyielding resolve that would not be easily extinguished. Before Thrakos could react, Sarah lunged forward, firing her weapon at the control console. The blast sent sparks flying, and the entire command deck was plunged into chaos as the ship's systems went haywire. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered as the ship's power grid was disrupted. "Now," Sarah shouted, and the humans sprang into action, quickly subduing the Jekker officers and securing the command deck. Thrakos fought back, but he was no match for the combined strength of the humans. Within moments, he was overpowered and disarmed, his reign of terror brought to an abrupt end. Sarah quickly took control of the command chair, her fingers flying over the alien controls as she accessed the ship's systems. She had no time to waste. The Jekker fleet would soon realize that something was wrong, and they would not hesitate to destroy their own ship to prevent it from falling into human hands. "We need to send a signal to the remaining human forces," Sarah said, her voice calm but urgent. "If we can alert them to our location, we might be able to turn this around." The others nodded, their faces grim but determined. They had fought hard to get this far, but the real battle was just beginning. The Jekker fleet was vast, and they were just one ship. But they had something the Jekker didn't: hope. And with that hope, they would fight to the very end. As Sarah transmitted the distress signal, she couldn't help but think of the countless lives that had been lost in the war. Friends, family, comrades in arms, all of them had given their lives for this moment. And now, it was up to her and the others to make sure that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The signal was sent, and now all they could do was wait. Wait and prepare for the fight of their lives. The final stand. As the distress signal pulsed through space, Sarah and her team fortified their position on the command deck. The Jekker fleet, spread out across the sector, would undoubtedly intercept the signal and converge on their location. Every second counted, and Sarah knew that their time was running out. "We need to buy ourselves as much time as possible," Sarah said, her mind racing with possibilities. "Prepare the ship's weapon systems and activate all defensive measures. If the Jekker are coming for us, we're going to make them pay for every inch." The humans scrambled to carry out her orders, working with an efficiency born of desperation. Despite the alien technology, they quickly adapted, using their collective knowledge to override the security protocols and bring the ship's systems online. Plasma cannons hummed to life, and energy shields flared as they powered up, creating a formidable defense around the captured vessel. Sarah knew they were vastly outnumbered, but she also knew that they had the element of surprise. The Jekker fleet would not expect one of their own ships to turn against them, and that gave the humans a brief, but critical, advantage. As she oversaw the preparations, Sarah couldn't help but think of the people she had lost, the friends who had fought alongside her, the loved ones who had perished in the initial invasion. The pain of those losses fueled her determination. She was not just fighting for survival. She was fighting for all those who could no longer fight for themselves. The sensors began to blare with incoming alerts. The Jekker fleet was on the move, closing in on their location. The ship's view screen filled with the sight of countless Jekker vessels, their menacing shapes cutting through the darkness of space like predators converging on their prey. "They're here," one of the crew members muttered, his voice tinged with fear. "Steady," Sarah replied, her tone firm. "We've made it this far. We're not going down without a fight." The first wave of Jekker ships opened fire, their energy beams slamming into the captured vessel's shields. The ship shook under the impact, but the humans held their ground, returning fire with everything they had. The space around the ship erupted into a chaotic dance of light and energy as the two sides exchanged volleys of deadly firepower. Sarah's hands moved deftly over the controls, directing the ship's weapons and coordinating the defensive strategy. The Jekker had superior numbers, but the humans fought with a tenacity that surprised even their enemies. They targeted key ships in the Jekker fleet, focusing their fire on the command vessels and disrupting their coordination. "We're holding them off," one of the crew members reported, though his voice was laced with tension. "For now," Sarah replied, her eyes locked on the view screen. She knew that their position was precarious. The Jekker would soon realize that their conventional tactics weren't working and would adapt. They needed reinforcements, and soon. As if in answer to her thoughts, the sensors picked up new signals, human ships, emerging from the dark void of space. The remnants of the human fleet, scattered and battered, had responded to the distress signal. They were few in number, but they were armed with the same fierce determination that had driven Sarah and her team. "Reinforcements are arriving," someone shouted, and a wave of hope swept through the command deck. The human ships joined the battle, their weapons blazing as they engaged the Jekker fleet. It was a desperate struggle, but the tide was beginning to turn. The combined firepower of the captured Jekker ship and the human reinforcements began to push the invaders back. Threkos, restrained and seething with anger, watched the battle unfold from where he was held captive. His empire, so confident in its superiority, was now facing the one thing it had never truly understood: the indomitable human spirit. For every Jekker ship that was destroyed, the humans seemed to grow stronger, more resolute. As the battle raged on, Sarah could see that the Jekker were faltering. Their once coordinated assault had become disorganized, their forces scattered by the relentless human counterattack. The captured ship's firepower, combined with the surprise of the human reinforcements, had caught them off guard. But the fight was far from over. The Jekker still outnumbered them, and their command vessels were regrouping for a final, decisive strike. Sarah knew that this next wave would be the most dangerous yet. "Prepare for the final assault," she ordered, her voice steady. "This is it. We either stand and fight, or we fall." The crew nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had come too far to give up now. This was their last stand, and they would make it count. As the Jekker command ships bore down on them, Sarah activated the ship's main weapon systems. Plasma cannons roared to life, firing a barrage of energy that tore through the enemy ranks. The human ships followed suit, their combined firepower turning the space around them into a storm of destruction. The Jekker ships retaliated with everything they had, unleashing a barrage of energy beams that battered the human defenses. The captured ship shields flickered under the strain, and alarms blared as critical systems began to fail. But the humans fought on, refusing to back down. "We're almost there," Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the battle. "Just a little longer." And then, like a beacon of hope, the Jekker fleet began to break. The human counterattack had been too fierce, too relentless. The Jekker command vessels, realizing they could not win, began to retreat. One by one, the enemy ships disengaged, retreating into the void from whence they had come. Cheers erupted across the command deck as the last of the Jekker ships fled. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the battle and driven the invaders back. But the cost had been high. Many ships had been lost, and countless lives had been sacrificed. The price of victory. The aftermath of the battle was both triumphant and somber. The once mighty Jekker fleet had been shattered, forced to retreat in the face of an enemy they had underestimated. But the cost of that victory weighed heavily on Sarah and the other survivors. The captured Jekker ship, now under human control, drifted in the void, surrounded by the wreckage of both human and alien vessels. The view screen displayed a scene of devastation: shattered hulls, debris fields, and the flickering lights of damaged ships struggling to stay operational. The human fleet had been victorious, but at a great cost. Sarah slumped back in the command chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Her body ached, her mind was numb, but she couldn't allow herself to rest just yet. There were still too many things to do, too many lives to account for. "Status report," she ordered, her voice hoarse. One of the crew members, his face grim, began to read off the list of damages. "Shields are offline, weapons systems are severely depleted, and we've lost over half our crew. Several of our ships are barely holding together, and we got wounded everywhere." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of the losses pressing down on her. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Jekker Empire was vast, and this victory, though significant, was just the beginning. "We need to regroup," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion. "Get the wounded to the medbay, and start repairs on the critical systems. We need to be ready in case the Jekker return." The crew nodded, their movements sluggish but determined. They had been through hell, but they had come out the other side stronger, more united. The bond they shared, forged in the fires of battle, was unbreakable. As the crew went about their tasks, Sarah turned her attention to Threkos. The Jekker commander was still restrained, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. He had been defeated, but his arrogance had not been entirely crushed. "You think this is over, human?" Threkos sneered. "The Jekker Empire will come for you. They will not stop until every last one of you is destroyed." Sarah met his gaze, her eyes cold and unyielding. "Let them come," she replied. "We'll be ready. And this time, we won't stop until the Jekker Empire is nothing but a memory." Threkos snarled, but there was a flicker of fear in his eyes, a fear that Sarah knew would spread throughout the Jekker ranks. They had faced the humans in battle, and had been found wanting. The tide had turned, and now it was the Jekker who would live in fear. As the ship's systems began to come back online, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. The road ahead was long, and the challenges they faced were immense. But for the first time since the war had begun, she felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity had proven that they could stand against the might of the Jekker Empire. They had shown the galaxy that they were not just survivors. They were fighters, and they would never surrender. The war was far from over, but Sarah knew that as long as there were humans willing to fight, there was always a chance for victory. A new dawn. The days following the battle were a blur of activity. The captured Jekker ship, now fully under human control, became a beacon of hope for the scattered remnants of humanity. Ships from all over the sector began to converge on their location, bringing with them survivors, supplies, and stories of resistance. Word of the victory spread like wildfire, igniting a spark of rebellion in the hearts of those who had once felt powerless. The human fleet, once on the brink of extinction, was now growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah found herself thrust into a new role, not just as a leader in battle, but as a symbol of hope for a species that had been pushed to the edge. It was a role she had never sought, but one she embraced with the same determination that had driven her throughout the war. The Jekker, reeling from their defeat, had withdrawn to regroup, but Sarah knew they would return. The Jekker Empire would not tolerate such a challenge to its dominance, and when they came back, they would come back with a vengeance. But this time, humanity would be ready. Under Sarah's leadership, the human fleet began to prepare for the next phase of the war. They salvaged what they could from the battlefield, using the alien technology to strengthen their defenses and upgrade their weapons. They trained relentlessly, honing their skills for the battles that lay ahead. And through it all, Sarah kept the memory of those they had lost close to her heart. Their sacrifice had given humanity a fighting chance, and she would make sure it was not in vain. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the fight was far from over. But she also knew that they had something the Jekker could never understand, a spirit that could not be broken, a will that could not be crushed. As the fleet prepared to move out, Sarah stood on the bridge of the captured ship, looking out at the stars. They were no longer the same people who had fled from the Jekker invasion. They were stronger now, united by a common purpose and a shared determination to reclaim their home. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly to herself, the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. "We will take back what is ours, and we will make sure that no one ever underestimates humanity again." The fleet began to move, the stars shifting as they set a course for their next objective. They were heading into the unknown, but this time, they were ready. As they jumped to faster-than-light travel, Sarah felt a sense of resolve settle over her. The war would continue, and there would be more battles, more losses, but there would also be more victories. And in the end, when the dust had settled and the last shot had been fired, humanity would still be standing. They would rebuild, they would reclaim their place in the galaxy, and they would forge a future where no one would ever dare to challenge them again. A new dawn was rising for humanity, and Sarah would make sure that it was one where they would not just survive, but thrive. The Jekker had awoken a sleeping giant, and now they would pay the price. As the stars streaked past the view screen, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The fight for survival had been hard, but the fight for victory would be even harder, and she was ready for it. Because this was humanity's time. Their time to rise, their time to fight, and their time to win.